Bismillah. We move this out of the way. I hope you can hear me, inshallah ta'ala. If you can't, just let me know. But we will begin promptly. I do have to teach another lesson. We started a new series on mantiq and logic. So I need to get to that lesson after this, inshallah ta'ala. So let's get into usul al-Shashi bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. So we've been doing amrun and nahyun, my friends, amrun and nahyun. And I just want to add a few more things here before we close this chapter and move on to the next one, bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. So let's do this. So we've talked quite a lot in the last lesson, which is important actually, about amr nahi and amal li'aynihi, hasan li dhatihi li ghayrihi. So there's a query that might come along, and I want to follow this reasoning, and inshallah it will become clear. And there's an objection, if you like, and there's an answer to that objection. That objection and answer actually helps us to understand fiqh at a slightly deeper level. Now, the query is this. So what's the objection? That we say that when you have a prohibition, a nahyun, a nahi, and if it comes from af'al hissiyya, so we talked about this in the two lessons beforehand, it means that that thing is intrinsically abhorrent. So when it's something to do with hissiyya was something like stealing. Okay, so stealing is a fi'l, an action that's hissiyya, sensorial, sense-based, and it's intrinsically immoral. Yeah. So I give the example stealing or whatever else it might be, and there's no legality behind it. So we talked about this. But then you say the objection is, well, we find examples where something is not always fitting this. So let me give an example. Let's think about intercourse, sexual intercourse, of course. So think about the example of intercourse. It's an act, of course, it's a fi'l, and it's prohibited, not prohibited in of itself, it's prohibited when a woman is in her days of bleeding, yeah, her menses. So prohibited. So intercourse in of itself is fine, but you have an exception when it's prohibited in days of menses. Okay. They say, well, you classify this particular act of intercourse with a woman in her menses as qabih. So it's understood as wrong, qabih. But you say it's qabih li ghayrihi. Why do you do that? You say it's a qabih li ghayrihi, and you don't say it's intrinsically immoral. Okay. So why do you do that? If you say because intercourse is a sexual intercourse is in someone's when someone is in their menses, is something that's hissy, and so intrinsically it should be prohibited. But you say it's not intrinsic, but it's because of some extrinsic reason. Why do you do that? So that's the objection. That is the objection, if you like. Okay. It sounds very academic, but actually out of this debate will come out some interesting findings. You can see how the scholars thought about it very, very carefully. So I hope you understand the objection here. So we have to reply to this. So what's our reply? We say intercourse in this particular circumstance is classed in this way because the exception to the rule is that when there is evidence to support something being قبيح لغيره. So when there's evidence to show that something is قبيح لغيره, yeah, despite the act being something that's أفعال حسية. So it's أفعال حسية, it's definitely one of these, it's definitely حسية. But we have evidence that tells us that it's قبيح because of some reason, some other reason. So if the evidence comes, it becomes قبيح لغيره. Right? And here we have the evidence is what? In the Quran, we have in Surah Baqarah, second chapter, verse number 222. Very easy to remember. Allah says in the Quran, وَيَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْمَحِيضِ. They ask you about menstruation. Then Allah says in the Quran, قُلْ هُوَ أَذًى. Say it is impurity. It is impurity. The word used here in the Quran is أذًى. قُلْ هُوَ أَذًى فَاعْتَزِلُوا النِّسَاءَ فِي الْمَحِيضِ. And so keep apart from women during menstruation. So we have evidence. Okay. So just to recap very, very briefly, something that's hissi, something that you can sense, you can see, is usually deemed as something intrinsically لذاته forbidden. So sexual intercourse is hissi, and sexual intercourse during the menses is hissi. But you've made it قبيح لغيره because of something else. And we say in our response that we do this because there's an evidence, and this is an evidence from the Quran. So Quran is telling us, God is telling us in the Quran that there's some external evidence that allows us to do this. Okay. This leads, of course, to a number of interesting outcomes, legal outcomes. So abhorrence is not intrinsic and is due to another cause. And that's what قبيح لغيره literally means. So because of that, now because of this, what's the legal consequence for all of this? The real question is, what is a legal consequence? What is the outcome of all of this? Right? What does it mean what does this abstract usul debate really mean in real life? So what happens is, because of this, we validate the consequences. So what happens is we validate the consequences. I'll give an example of that and it'll make it very, very clear, inshallah. So because of this, we validate the consequences. Consequences are the outcomes, if you like, but I'm going to stick to the word consequences. Okay. So we validate the consequences of someone having intercourse with someone during a woman's period. Okay. So to give an example, if it's the first time that someone has had intercourse, then they will no longer be classed as virgins. Okay. So remember the rule. When someone has fornication, this is just the outcome. Someone does zina, there's two outcomes depending on their status. If they are non-virgin, i.e., they've had intercourse before, the punishment for them is rajam. This is the theory, right? This is how we do it. If they are a virgin, i.e., they haven't had intercourse before, then the punishment for them is lashing. So can you see there's a consequence? Okay. So if it's the first time that the intercourse has taken place, then they will no longer be classified as virgin. Yeah. And so they're going to be sentenced to death for fornication thereafter. Right? So if it was to happen, so what's the details of this? Well, the details of this case is that if the fornicator is not a virgin, right, the punishment for fornicating is the rajam. Yeah. Or death by stone, whatever you want to call it. Now, if the perpetrator is a virgin, then the punishment is lashing. Now, the conditions, now this is important here. So let me do this in different writing. The conditions for the punishment of a non-virgin, this person here, is that they've got to be free, they have to be mature, they have to be sane, they have to be a Muslim, and they've had to have intercourse with their wife in a permitted manner. So I'm going to put last condition here. Permitted. This is one of the conditions. Intercourse. You can see where this is going. Intercourse in a. This is one of the conditions among the other ones. So if a person wants to get married, on the first occasion of intimacy, have intercourse with his wife when she was in her period, he will still be considered a non-virgin. Right, so let me draw a timeline. Someone gets married at T0. Yeah, he gets married here. Someone. And then he has intercourse with his wife. So intercourse with the wife. But she's in her period. Period here. Right? Then the consequence of that, married intercourse with wife, the consequence of that is that they'll be considered a non-virgin. Okay. This is because intercourse is forbidden due to a non-intrinsic reason, which is this idea of other. Okay. So even though it's not permitted and illegal, so what he did here, he had intercourse with his wife, and it's illegal, shar'an, it's illegal to do such an act. He's done the act. And this act is illegal due to لغيره, as we've established, right? قبيل لغيره, because of course intercourse in of itself, لذاته, is fine. There's nothing wrong with intercourse. It's when you do it when a woman is in her period or in her menses. Okay. So what that essentially means that the person, a man, so we draw him here, he's had intercourse in a normally permitted matter. So his status as a non-virgin is established. So he's a non-virgin. Okay. So even though he's had intercourse with a woman in her period, it's forbidden, it's illegal, it will change his status. This is why we go back to the consequences. So in this case, the consequences. You see? Can you see the example here? I'll give you another example just to make this clear. I hope this is clear. I'll take some questions at the end, but that's how it works. Say, for example, if a woman was divorced 3 times, so this is a separate case. Say a woman was given 3 divorces, and she's waited the required time. So she got divorced, she's had 3, and she's waited 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 3 periods. Yeah, and then she marries. This is the woman here, and then she marries another man. She marries a man here. There's 1, 2. She's waited her period, and she marries this man. And then what happens is that she has intercourse with him. Yeah. The second husband has intercourse with her, and say he has it with her on her period. He has intercourse with her on the period, and then afterwards he divorces her. So he gives her a divorce. He divorces her. Yeah. Now she can marry her first husband. So let's say this is husband. This is husband. Her original husband was husband A. We give her 3 divorces. She waited, and she got married to this man, husband B, and she had intercourse with him during her period. And then husband B divorces her. She can marry. She can marry husband A. Yeah. Yeah. And then because effectively that's counted as because she can go back to him, because that's counted. The consequence of that is that she's had intercourse with him. Yeah. So this is the consequence. Let me give you another interesting one. So, let me give you another interesting one. Let me save this. So let's look at a little bit of an interesting scenario, inshallah ta'ala, which will help you flesh this out. So, let's say if intercourse takes place during the woman's period, and after the bleeding stops, she then refuses the husband on the ground that he has not paid her bridal gift. Right. So this is like an interesting one. And I'm going to try and explain this for you, but I think you'll understand a lot of masail through this. So, let's do a timeline, maybe make it easier for us. So, timeline. Okay. So, this is a woman. She's in her period. Okay. So, what's happened is in this period, the husband and the wife have had intercourse. Okay. Shouldn't have happened, but it's happened. Okay. And then the bleeding stops, obviously, in time one. Okay. And then she says, I'm going to refuse. What basically refuse means that she's refusing him sexual access. This is all theoretical. This is all theoretical for us for now. Yeah, so she refuses. She says, I'm not going to give you access to that. Okay. What's the consequence of this? It's very, very important. I'll explain this to you, inshallah. She will be considered a disobedient wife. Okay. What's called nashiza in Arabic. Okay. According to, I'll put it here just to make it fair. This is according to I put the Sahih here. This is the Sahibin. So, Sahibin, of course, Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad Shaybani. Okay, just to kind of say, this is like an internal legal debate. Okay. So she's considered nashiza, and so the consequence of that is that no maintenance costs. So she then refuses the husband. The reason she refuses the husband is that he hasn't given me the bridal gift. No bridal gift. Now, if you've done fiqh at a deeper level, you see what's going on here. And you'll see that a lot of fiqh is built on thinking about other questions, other masail. So just to go quickly recap this one before we go into the details. Husband and a wife, they're married. They have intercourse during the period, when she's in period. Then after the period is over, she refuses the intercourse or access with her husband because she says, "You never gave me any bridal gift." The legal outcome of this is that she's disobedient, and so she won't be entitled to any maintenance cost. Now, this verdict is exactly the same for the one who refused her husband after intercourse took place outside the bleeding period, right? Now, what's the background to this? The background to this is the bridal gift is the right of the wife. It's her right. The bridal gift is her right. Bridal gift is her right. It's the wife's right, right? Just like any payment, it's kind of like a payment. She's entitled to receiving some sort of payment. Like if you buy something or you sell something, you're entitled to some sort of counter value, right? Because if a buyer and a buyer, seller, right? So he sells something to him, right? And he gives him an item, say this is the item, a box, and he gives him money in return. Yeah, pound sign. Now, if he doesn't give him the money, he can say, well, I'm not going to give you this item. That's what's happening here. If you don't give me the money, if you don't pay me the £10, say for example, I'm not giving you the item, right? In the same way, the wife, in theory, can say to the husband, you can't have access to me until you've given me the bridal gift. Makes complete sense. This is how they think about it. You can't have access to me. You can't have access to me because you haven't given me the bridal gift. We've made a contract that there's a bridal gift that you owe me. And so legally she can withhold herself. Right? But let's go back to this buy and sell example. What if he hands over the item to him? So they've made a deal. He hands over the item to him. The seller hands over the item to the buyer. And he doesn't take the money. He hasn't taken the money yet. Right? He's not taken the money. The right to demand non-usage of the item until payment is forfeited. So once he's given it to him, he can't say to him, "Oh, you can't use it until you give him money." You've handed it over to him. Because you handed it over to him, you forfeited the right to say to the person you can't use it. So as soon as the buyer gets it, he can start using it, right? Because as soon as you hand it over to him, yes, he owes him money, but he's handed it over to him. You've given it to him, he's got it. So the right to demand that you can't use that item has gone now. You can see what's happened here. Okay, it's like the seller has given up the right, and once the right is given up, it's no longer applicable and it can't be restored. Similarly, if you think about it here, in this case again, what's the wife done? She's made an agreement with the husband. She's given her access to him right here during this period, even though it was haram to have intercourse. She's given access to it, just like the seller had, right? So she's forfeited the right to withhold herself from the husband on the next occasion. Okay, and she's done it from herself. And if she then refuses, she's seen as a nashiza, and so no rightful. So she's not rightful for any maintenance cost from the husband. That's kind of like the basic logic of it. You can see how they think about it through other masail. Okay, just give me a second. I've just got a phone call, and I'll be back with you in a second. Okay, sorry about that. I'm back again. Inshallah ta'ala. So I hope that makes sense and you've had some time to think about that. Okay. Now, this is obviously the position of the Sahibain, the two students of Imam Abu Hanifa. Legal debates are always more complicated than they first come out. Imam Abu Hanifa has a slightly different position. Just to be fair, I'm going to present this, but it's not too important. Imam Abu Hanifa says she's still available, she still gets the maintenance. So as opposed to here, he says she still gets the maintenance. Okay. The act is obviously forbidden and haram during the period, but it doesn't prevent for him, it does not prevent consequences. Okay. So divorcing a woman in her period is forbidden, for example, but it will still be established and she will have to begin her iddah. So Allah in the Quran tells us not to give talaq to a woman when she's in her period, but the consequences will be recognized. Okay. For example, let me give an example. If you perform wudu, ablution, with stolen water, the prayer itself is considered valid. Right? It's absolutely valid. It doesn't forbid its consequences. Or, for example, if you, for example, handle a copy of the Quran, right? In the same way. So if you hand it over Quran to someone, you shouldn't be touching it without wuzu, but the handing over is considered. Okay. Or for example, if you went hunting with a stolen gun, or I don't know, arrows, or a bow and arrow or something, but when you catch the meat is permitted. Or if you slaughter an animal with a stolen knife, or you pray on stolen land, or you buy and sell after the call for Jum'ah, these are all forbidden, but the consequences are still valid, right? So for us, we differentiate between the act and the consequences. Because the consequences, the act might be forbidden, for example, but the consequences are still recognized. To the meat, for example, if you stole a slaughtered animal with a stolen knife, the meat is still punishable, and you can eat it. So in the same way, intercourse during the period is forbidden, but the consequences are established. That's the key thing here. What we're trying to really work out is the consequences established. You see this in detail in books of fiqh. Okay, I hope that helps. Let's move on, inshallah ta'ala, to something else, just to build on what we've been saying. Okay. So just to build on, and we'll end there, inshallah, this topic. So there's an interesting conversation here, and I'll end with this set of masail, inshallah ta'ala. So we've got this rule in mind that when we have a nahi, just to recap, when we have a nahyun upon an af'al sharia, a fi'l sharia, the act remains legal in of itself, and we say that an nahi upon af'al sharia, the amount that the act remains legal itself, we say there's evidence that sinners have a right to testify. So this idea that a nahi upon af'al sharia, the act remains itself, legal itself. We talked about this before. So we say, for example, that there is evidence that sinners have a right to testify. So sinful people have a right to testify. Okay. So in Surah Nur, verse number 4, Allah says, وَلَا تَقْبَلُوا لَهُمْ شَهَادَةً أَبَدًا. Don't accept their testimony ever. Okay. This is Surah Nur, verse number 4. So sinners have a right to testify. Right, to testify. Now we have a verse in the Quran that says there's something else. So what's going on here? So this is a bit of reasoning that requires you to solve this puzzle. So for example, if there was a marriage ceremony, say 2 people got married. Let's draw a diagram. You can tell I like my little diagrams. So let's say 2 people got married, a husband and a wife. And the people that witnessed this, so there's 2 witnesses, say there's 2 men. Right? 2 men witnessed this. They were witnesses. Now remember, they're not giving testimony, they're witnessing. There were 2 witnesses, 2 of them. And they were sinful men, sinful too. Okay, passive. The marriage is valid. The marriage is considered valid. And you're saying, well, how is that possible? Well, this gets you to think a little bit more. Okay. Why is this though? Why is the witnessing of 2 sinful people over a marriage valid? Why is this? Well, the simple reason is, what allows you to give a testimony? When you're called into a test to give a test, did you see these people get married? Right? It presupposes, if you go back in time, before testimony, yeah, because a testimony can either be accepted or rejected. And what's Allah saying? وَلَا تَقْبَلُوا لَهُمْ شَهَادَةً أَبَدًا. But testimony can only be accepted or rejected. But in order to get to that stage where you have a testimony, you need to have something that allows that to happen. to allow it to be rejected or accepted, right? If you don't have that right on the outset, it can't be dismissed and rejected, right? So what we're saying is that not testimony, witnessing is allowed. What's not allowed here in the verse is the testimony. The witnessing is fine, but the testimony is not allowed, right? Because the prohibition in the verse is from accepting their testimony, and acceptance of a testimony with the right to testify is impossible. Like you need to have the right to do that, right? You can't accept something if you didn't even have a right in the first place. So Allah says, "Wala taqbalu," don't accept their testimony ever. So this is in line with the Quran. But to be able to accept or reject the testimony presupposes that you have a right to do that. And that comes from witnessing. So people who are reprimanded in sinful cases of qadr, so we have this idea of qadr, false accusation. This is where you're not allowed to accept them. So they have a right to testimony, but it won't be accepted because there's an issue with their delivery and a possibility of falsehood. So it's ineligible for admission. Yeah, this is all you need to know. I'm not going to go into too much detail. There's a difference between these two things, because that's the shahada. We'll stop there, inshallah ta'ala. I'll just quickly summarize what we've been covering very, very quickly, inshallah ta'ala, before next week we'll move on to a new topic. So, an-nahi is, number one, the directing or the direction of a prohibition to the other by a superior. قول القائل لغيره لا تفعل على سبيل الاستيلاء. So, when someone tells you not to do something, it can only be a nahi if it's someone who is above you. We talked about that idea of being two types of nahi, hissiyya and shar'iyya. Hissiyya is the first one is things that are observable, palpable, sensible, right? Even before the Sharia, people know that it's wrong. Stealing is wrong. Sex out of marriage is wrong. Even before the Sharia comes. Fornication is another one. Obviously, I've said that. Wine, stealing. Everybody attacks. Everybody with sound reasoning will say it's immoral. Then you have the second one with nahi from Shari'iyya. These are matters that the Sharia itself prohibits. So there's nothing wrong with fasting in of itself, but the fasting on the day of Eid is prohibited. Yeah, or praying salah during the prohibited times. So it's good in itself. It's good to fast, for example. It's good to pray, for example. But the Sharia comes and says for us some other reason that's not allowed. Okay. And this is the end of this chapter, this section. Inshallah ta'ala, what I'm going to do is give you some more examples in the next lecture. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll just stop there. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh.
Salam ji.
Can I just ask about the logic course? Is it a live class or recordings?
It's live and recorded and lifetime access as long as the internet exists.
Yeah. So I've signed up to it.
Yeah.
What time is the live class?
It should, if everything goes well, it should start at 6 o'clock.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
So please join. You should have lifetime access. Of course, if there's any issues, just let me know, inshallah. I'll try and help you out. Thank you. Jazakallah. Okay. I think we'll stop there if no one has any questions. I'll see you all next week, inshallah. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum.